if he's got like a strong hand here, like a 3+, or he has a bluff, then there would be literally no reason to 3-bet click the turn, right?
Stack size is $800 in a 5-5.
Yep.
And I am under the gun with King 10 of spades. So I raised to $20.
Okay.
Middle position calls, button calls, and small blind call.
So middle position calls, button calls, small blind calls. So it looks like it's going to be 4 ways. What did you raise to? 20?
$20.
Is that about standard?
It was standard for the good players. Some of the big fish are raising to 60, 75 with like Jack 10 offsuit for middle position. So it just depends on who's raising and how good of a player they are.
Okay.
But 20 was standard for the good players.
So the pot's $80. Okay. Right? The pot's $80?
Yep.
Okay. What's the flop?
Flop comes King of clubs, 6 of spades, 3 of spades.
So you flop top pair, and you have a flush draw here, right? With King 10 of spades on King of clubs, 6 of spades, 3 of spades.
Yep.
Okay.
So this spot was kind of interesting to me because I wanted to get as much money in as possible against like a 7-8 of spades or just like a weaker flush draw. Now, in this game, I noticed that a lot of 3-bets pre-flop came exclusively for value. Like people weren't balancing like their 3-bets with like an ace-5 of hearts or something like that as like a bluff. So no, I didn't put anyone on ace king because there wasn't a 3-bet pre-flop. Now, what I was thinking in this spot was King 10 is about the worst king I can have in this spot, especially from under the gun. So I wanted to play it a little bit differently, and I check. So the reason I wanted to check was because I wanted to get a check raise in to usually get somebody off like a king jack or a king queen type of spot.
Well, I mean, that's funny that you say that. I mean, that's sound thinking if you think that check raising will get King X to fold. It's not a bad spot to check. I've talked about how sometimes people will overplay top pair in a flush draw where they don't have the greatest kicker. Like, look at it. Like at this particular situation, like you block a lot of the front door spades, right? Obviously, you can continue. And this is a really good example sometimes like on a king high board with king 10 or maybe king 9 suited or having like queen 10 suited on a queen high board and you have the flush draw. In certain situations, now listen, you can obviously bet small because you can obviously call raises and stuff like that too, and you very well might have the best hand. But in certain situations, if you're only getting action from a better king, you could sometimes see checking. So I don't mind the check. I'm not exactly sure about going for a check raise because I think that's a big leap saying that, oh, I'm going to check here to get king jack or king queen to fold. I'm going to check raise them and they're going to fold. If that was the case, you could just check raise every single hand, right? And get everybody to fold every time, right? As the pre-flop raiser.
That's fair. I mean, I was just sort of like, this is, I've played many hands at this game and it's like, you check raise with sets and people just call you all the way down to the river and like they have top pair. And so I was just thinking like, what's the best way to get, especially like in a multi-way pot? Like if the middle position guy happens to bet, let's say he bets around half pot and then the 2 players behind him call, then all of a sudden I get a check raise in. And if I can get all 3 of them to fold, well then it looks first of all, it looks really strong because I can easily have like aces or kings in that spot. And then it looks like I'm protecting against the flush draw. So,
well, yeah, but didn't you just say though that you check raise a set because top pair will call down the whole way? So that's why I wouldn't want to necessarily do that, right? Because you're not going to get king jack or king queen to fold. But I don't mind the check. I just think maybe not necessarily check raise. Okay, so you check, and then what happens?
Okay, so I check, and then it checks through on the flop.
Okay, so it checks through.
Which I wasn't too happy about.
Well, I mean, I think you can get some future value here, right?
That's fair. So then the turn brings the 3 of diamonds.
Okay. So king of clubs, 6 of spades, 3 of spades, 3 of diamonds. Okay.
Now, the small blind checks, and I lead out for about 50.
Okay, I might go a little bit smaller than that because I think, again, positional awareness, this is a crush lab poker thing. The only person that's naturally checking to you on the flop where you don't actually know their hand really, if they're just always checking to you, is the small blind, right? Because of where your position is, when the guys behind you check on the flop after you've checked, and you also have a king, you pretty much like it's very likely that someone's not really going to have a king here when they check behind you, especially on a two flush board. So I don't really think anybody's strong. Now on the turn, the small blind gets to act his natural action because he had checked you naturally on the flop, and he checks again. So I don't really think anybody has a king. Once in a while, you might have a guy run into a three. So really, you want to get like hands like eights, nines, 6x or something like this to call. And you don't really have to protect against much. I might bet like 30 here, given this action. But okay, you bet 50. So hero bets 50. Okay.
Middle position pretty much snap folds, and
Okay.
then the button tanks for maybe a minute or so,
Mm-hmm.
and then raises it to 130.
And then the small blind folds, I assume.
Yeah, small blind basically snap folds, and then it's back onto me.
So that's interesting because again, the button checked on the flop, right?
Right.
So, you know, what so it's kind of it doesn't make a ton of sense for it to be super duper like boated up value, meaning I'd be very surprised if you had a hand like sixes which checked on the flop, and now when he's made the sort of nuts here like with a boat, he raises turn. What I mean by
Right. I
that
don't.
is
I
it's
don't. I,
usually players are consistent like with, oh, I'm going to slow play the flop, now I'm going to slow play the turn because I have a boat. So I mean obviously you could have a three, right?
right. So I wasn't thinking he
Yeah.
was boated by any means.
Yeah.
Like he
Yeah.
he seems like a solid player that he would obviously bet his sets in position and like not let free spades come out like
Uh-huh.
then be in a shitty spot.
Mm-hmm.
But then he also seemed like the type of player that just like wasn't going to raise like this on a bluff. So what I was basically putting on him on was like a type of hand like ace three or something like that, just because like a lot of these players like to defend their buttons with like very
Mm-hmm.
wide range of hands. Like it could have even been ace three offsuit.
Right.
So I was thinking he could have had that type of hand, or maybe he had something like 4-5 that he was turning into or he was bluffing with like maybe because he thought I checked back flop, I could have like queens or jacks or something like that. And now he's repping the king.
Well, yeah, I mean, a couple things on that. Ace three off is certainly not going to be a solid player from the button. Four five is interesting though too. If like a 4-5 suited, like you'd think that there would be a again, like if he's not betting the flop, is he raising the turn with that hand? Listen, it's a small raise. I mean, you can absolutely call just for your flush draw. Once in a while, you might run into a king as well, or he just checks behind with some bullshit that he has. So I mean, obviously, I would
Right.
call.
So this was also in a situation where I was thinking of like doing the min click back, just like see what he would do. And so I was thinking of popping it to 260, which if I hit a 10 or like a spade on the river, then it would leave me with a pot sized jam.
No, I don't. I don't. Um, Marco, right? That's your name. The
Yeah.
problem with that though is that you sort of put him on kind of, I think, a reasonable range on the turn, which you sort of talk through, right? Which is like a three. Maybe he's got some bluffs with some sort of draw or something like that. So if your opponent has, I don't know if whenever your opponent has a polarized range, and we can debate the semantics of what polarized means. But in this case, just like if he's got like a strong hand here, like a 3+, or he has a bluff, then there would be literally no reason to 3-bet click the turn, right? Because
Yeah,
he's just going to
that makes sense.
fold his bluffs, right? And then he's just going to continue with 3x or jam on you, with 3x. So I think calling here is 100% the right play. You called, right?
Yeah, so I did.
Yeah.
I did
Okay.
end up calling. That's why it took so long because I
Okay.
was thinking about the merits of min clicking the turn, but I ended up going against it.
Okay.
And then the river comes the seven of hearts.
So by the way, I have the pot at 340 because you guys put in about 260 on the turn. It was 80 on the flop. Again, hero under the gun with king 10 of spades raises to 20. MP1 calls, button calls, small blind calls. The board comes out. King of clubs, 6 of spades, 3 of spades. It gets checked through. Hero has top pair and a flush draw. Turns the 3 of diamonds, so pairs the bottom card. Small blind checks. Hero bets 50. MP1 folds. Button sort of clicks it up to 130. Small blind folds. Hero calls. Pot's 340. We're left to the river, and you say the river here is the 7 of hearts, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so in this spot, I'm basically checking almost 100% of my range to him because I definitely don't want to lead out with something like ace king or king queen or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't. I mean, you're sort of playing the hand as a bluff catcher on the turn.
Right.
What I would say is that you are definitely correct in theory. There can be a little bit of a weird thing that can go on at the low stakes in live poker where, let's say that you played the hand out this way and then the river was a spade. Now, again, sort of going along with what you said, which I agree with, you say normally, oh, well, I'm just going to check the river because he raised the turn, where these guys will just check back, even like very strong hands, because they're scared of the flush, even though it appears like you wouldn't have a flush because you didn't really bet the flop. So you can do some strange leads on the river for value when you sort of make a hidden hand because you don't want it to get checked back at the end. But I do tend to agree with you, and obviously
Right.
this
So
bricked
if
out.
for example, if I had like, if the turn or the river came with 10 of hearts or something like that, I could lead out maybe half pot and then obviously fold to a raise.
I don't think that with the 10 coming, I don't think it changes anything, because the only thing a 10 would change would be if somehow he checked back the flop with like king jack or king queen and he was making like a showdown turn raise. And what I mean by that is just like raising the turn to check the river.
To get a cheap showdown,
If we
yeah.
if we look at that turn range, which again I think that you said was accurate, where it's a 3 or a bluff, the 10 doesn't change anything for you, right? You still lose to a 3 and you beat a bluff. So you wouldn't want to bet out if a 10 were to
Okay,
come.
that
You
makes
know,
sense.
you know.
Okay, so then I check over to him, and
Uh,
then this is sort of where I've been making a lot of my success has been coming from just like noticing little things about people that have been sort of tipping me off, where in terms of tells. So the guy, he like starts tanking for a good minute and a half. Like I guess he's trying to put me on a hand, and then he does that thing where like he had like two stacks of greens, and he like takes them, breaks them down, and then like takes 300 out of like the stack of 1,000 that he had, and then bets 300. And so I was like, this is like, I don't know if he was like trying to get information out of me or something like that, but like he bets 300 into a pot of like what was it, 320, 330 on the river?
so he bets 300 and you started with like 800, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Um, so he bets 300 into 340, and 4 or 5 obviously comes in here now too, right? 4 or 5
right.
comes in and he can have a 3. You block the spades. I
That's what
mean,
I was thinking.
like it's just one of these things where you block the spades. This is not going to be consistent with King X now. I don't think now that he bets 300 at the end. But he's repping like 3x or 6 full. You kind of played it a little bit unorthodox in the sense that you didn't bet the flop, but you did call his raise on the turn. It's probably closer than some people think. I mean, I kind of lean towards a fold, but are you good here? 1 out of say 3.2 times, and the fact that you check the flop, if you think that that is so inconsistent with the way that people play that particular game that you're playing in the home game, meaning that like you might be one of the only people that would check like top pair on a board like this, where it somehow gave him the green light to try to bluff you because the fact that you didn't bet the flop, he thinks you don't have a king, and he was somewhat maniacal. I could sort of see a call, but if I was playing this like in a casino and those like at a 5-5, like at the bike, and those things weren't really present, I would lean towards folding here once he puts in this big bet at the end after raising you on the turn.
So that's sort of what I was thinking. Like I was thinking because of the flop check, I was like very under repping my hand. And then it was like my second orbit at the table, so I didn't really get to see many hands out of any people. Like I didn't know the dynamic of the like how everyone was playing that night, and so I ended up folding. And then he pretty quickly mucked, and then like I didn't really get any more information out of that. But then what sort of confused me was that like the next two orbits after this hand I said show a bluff if you have it. And he didn't show, and then the next like orbit someone said show a bluff or something, and he like bluff checked raised the river with like king high and then showed it, and like it was a fun time and everything. And he showed like the next three bluffs, but he didn't show that. Then a couple hours later, I leave and I say, "Hey, did you have it that one hand against me?" He's like, "Yeah, good fold." But like he didn't, I didn't even tell him what I had, and he just said good fold. And so I'm like, okay, so he had to have like a full house or like something like that.
Yeah, I mean
So
it's
it
it's
was
it's too bad obviously that you didn't know, but I wouldn't feel. Yeah, I mean it's interesting because sometimes we can look at certain history, very short term history that will influence us. Like you said, like, oh, this guy check raised the river, oh, he's a maniac, but it might not actually be even that applicable to a given situation. Like people actually will tend to misapply a given situation where even if a guy is capable of bluffing in a given scenario, that doesn't necessarily mean that he's bluffing in this scenario.
Right.
You know what I
That's
mean? You know what I mean? So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting, but I appreciate the call. Thank you very much.